A quick look at the Irish provinces over the weekend. Matt, we talked in advance of La Rochelle 32, Leinster 23, and you were, like most people really, pretty confident Leinster would find a way to get this done. So what happened here that you weren't expecting? What took you most by surprise?
I think the completeness of the La Rochelle victory. I think, Joe, I thought the refereeing was very poor, but you can't, even with a different referee, La Rochelle win that game. They nullified Leinster at every turn. There wasn't one area where you said Leinster had dominance, especially after the first 20 minutes when Leinster scored their try and there was a sin bin against La Rochelle. From that time on, La Rochelle were very much the dominant team. The second half, Leinster hardly got into the La Rochelle 22, except that right at the end of the game when they scored a try, they just couldn't get their hands on the ball, couldn't get territory. And when they did, La Rochelle just nullified them. Now, I'm going to say something here, and I don't want anyone to jump down my neck because I'm saying this as a praise of Ronan and La Rochelle. I mean, they're offside all day, but that's what you've got to do. They just didn't let Leinster get that third pass in. When Leinster are in attack and they get their third pass away, they really can create trouble, as we saw against Exeter. But La Rochelle just nullified them. They competed like demons at the breakdown, and Leinster couldn't get past second gear. And I do have to say there was, in both matches, some very, very poor officiating. But the best teams did win, for sure.
What jumped out to you, Chris?
Just the power of La Rochelle was frightening. I think that the dynamism of their forwards, the relentlessness of it, the physicality, I think will have, shocked not just Ireland fans, but fans in England as well. If teams like La Rochelle are going to be putting out, on one side of the scrum, Winnie Antonio, Will Skelton, Gregory Aldrit, we know he's a phenomenal player. They got clever halfbacks. Yeah, they just looked a really complete side. And it's very rare you see Leinster shut out like that. I think Saracens maybe have done it to them once or twice over the years. That quarter-final of the tournament last year, that in Newcastle 2019, Sarries got the better of them. But more often than not, Leinster do to teams what they did to Exeter, dominate the collisions, get that quick ruck ball play with a real accuracy and a ruthlessness that they just, after that first 10, 15 minutes, they didn't have a sniff. I thought 10 minutes in, Leinster were going to blow them apart. I didn't see the La Rochelle vice-like grip of the game coming, but once they took control of it, Leinster just couldn't breathe, could they, for that whole second half? So it was an ominously imposing performance from La Rochelle.
It's really interesting you bring up that theme of the power of La Rochelle and the two Saracens games, because that has been, well, I suppose at the end point for Leinster over the last number of years, that issue with the power game has been discussed. And Matt, it was interesting, Stuart Lancaster, the quotes appeared today. He was talking about the expanded Pro 14 very soon, and he was saying of the Bulls and the Sharks and the Stormers and the Lions coming on board. He said, for us as a group, we need that different challenge, that heavier team to play against and to learn the lessons of the Saracens or La Rochelle in this instance, which is pretty much an admission that Leinster spent too much time in the Pro 14 bossing other sides and therefore are not practiced when it comes to dealing with being on the back foot or dealing with the challenges of those heavier teams, to use Lancaster's words.
Yeah, an interesting observation from Stuart. And to build on Chris's point, Will Skelton was at the heart of those Saracen shutouts, and I thought he was at the heart of the La Rochelle shutout. He was just so difficult to handle. Now, I've seen Will Skelton since he was a little boy playing in Sydney, and he's always been an enormous kid. Was never fit. He went to Saracens, and Saracens got him absolutely into top physical shape, and he's held that shape. He was absolutely extraordinary. I'm sure the Wallabies will be banging on Ronan's door to see if they can get him to come back at some stage, because he was fantastic, as was 34-year-old Vic DeVito and 35-year-old Ronan Sazzi in the second row. And Aldrit was brilliant. The other part, Joe, and we did talk about this beforehand, Ohio West had only kicked 59% in the season, and in the quarterfinal against Sale, missed some relatively easy kicks. And his incredible goal-kicking performance put scoreboard pressure on Leinster. So Leinster couldn't find a spot anywhere on the field where they could avoid pressure. And I think when the ridiculous sin binning of James Lowe occurred late in the game where the referee said, you left your feet purposely over the ball when James Lowe had crawled out. His head's out one side and a La Rochelle player is laying over his knees and he got sin bin for it. The game was over. But despite that sin binning, it was rather a symptom of what was occurring. Leinster just could not physically get away from La Rochelle. They hunted them down on every aspect, with the ball and without the ball. And you've got to give it to Ronan and Jono Gibbs. They both know Leinster pretty well, especially Jono, who's there 5 years, and Ronan's arch enemy for a decade. And they set a trap and their players executed that trap pretty brilliantly.
Yeah, Chris, on the one hand, obviously, Irish rugby fans disappointed not to see Leinster in the final. On the other hand, we're probably pretty excited to see the O'Gara career take off. I mean, he was on BT a couple of weeks ago after the win against Gloucester, talking to your podcast colleague Ugo Monye and Martin Bayfield as well, and kind of caught the imagination the way he was talking, and we're well adversed in all that over the last couple of years. What are you making of O'Gara and the way he's going about his career? Is he catching the eye in England in the Premiership, do you suspect?
Oh, 100%. We were having a chat on 5 Live. I was speaking to Mark Chapman about this a couple of weeks ago. It's been spotted by people, I think, not just within rugby union. When you've got a guy who has achieved what he has achieved as a player, and then when you see the kind of patient I say calculate is the wrong word, because I don't think you can't really map out a coaching journey that takes you to Paris and to Canterbury and then to La Rochelle. He's taken opportunities that have come his way, but the key thing, he's not rushed into anything. He's not gone, right, I need to coach Munster straight away, or I need to take the Ireland job before I'm ready, or he doesn't feel he needs to go into a backroom role at one of those places. And maybe, just use as another example, someone like Nick Easter, who's a really promising young coach, former England number 8. He went straight into the Harlequins backroom team. It didn't work out. Then he took himself away to the Stormers, now to Newcastle. If he comes back to Harlequins, he'll be 5 times the coach. So I think that's what O'Gara clearly wants to do, doesn't he, guys? He wants to just take it slowly. So when he does get the big job, and I've never seen a guy who feels more anointed to coach his country at any sport, like with Ronan O'Gara and the Ireland national team, and whether Munster comes first or not, that's, who knows how these things pan out. But he clearly doesn't want to rush into anything and take the job on before he's absolutely confident he'll make a resounding success of it. So just watching the way he's going about his coaching journey is fascinating, because it's only going one way, and it looks like it's only going to end up with the dream job for him.
Yeah, it certainly feels that way. Total tangent, brief aside, as you were talking there, I just thought Martin Johnson. Does he express regret, Chris, about taking that big job too early?
Oh, every time you think about Martin Johnson, you think it's such a shame that he's not involved in the sport anymore. And he's been back on BBC TV the last couple of years doing some punditry, which I think most people found it just great to see Martin Johnson, because after 2011, he went into the rugby wilderness and still doing loads of stuff with his charity and other business interests. So he's keeping busy, no doubt, but it just feels a crying shame that a guy with that rugby intellect and that experience, he just went into a job that he couldn't say no to. But in hindsight, does he wish he would have said no? Maybe in hindsight, but then at the time, do you ever turn down coaching your country? You mean, you touched upon Stuart Lancaster just then. How much better an England coach would he be now after 5 years coaching a side like Leinster? Look at someone like Michael Checker. He might think, if I could do the Australia job in a few jobs' time, you never really know how things are going to pan out, do you? But I think, Johnson, he's not really expressed any desire to get back into coaching. So unless something drastically changes with him, that's the only time we'd see him as a coach. That spell with England, which didn't work out, which is such a shame.
Matt, I know in the context of O'Gara, you're absolutely a proponent of him biding his time, which, to be fair, he seems to be doing. He's in no rush to get out of La Rochelle.
Well, he's done his talking for all of us. He just signed a new contract as Director of Rugby, because technically Jono Gibbs is Director of Rugby and Ronan works for Jono. Now, that doesn't seem to have been how the relationship spun out publicly anyway, and Jono's off to Claremont. But I was pretty sure that Ronan was going to stay in La Rochelle. Now, he's never told me that. We've had some conversations, but he never said, I'm definitely staying, is what's going on. But you've also got to see, Ronan's a young man. He's got a young family. They're living in a beautiful part of France. They're learning another language. He's gaining great experience as a head coach. And Ronan has said to me and he understands. He's at the beginning of his journey, and you have to pace that out as you go through. And he has only been a head coach for a brief period. He's been around the traps and done a lot of learning, and he has got an incredibly good rugby mind ticking all the time. His thinking is fantastic. He's climbing the mountain a different way. I love talking rugby with him, and he is smart, right? The guy doesn't do what he did on a rugby field and do what he's done since then without being smart. So he's re-signed there, and I had very little doubt. I will put it the other way. I would have been shocked if he'd gone back to Munster. And I'm going to say, why go back? Munster are in a great place right now, and it's not a coaching issue at Munster. It's a players issue. And I think Ronan O'Gara, and for the long-term good of Irish rugby, has made the exact right choice. 3 or 4 years as a head coach, and he's going to have a bad year somewhere. That just happens, and he'll have to figure his way through that. And that's important for him as well, just as learning about winning is. You've got to learn to get through those hard years, because when you get to international level, you don't come through a season with 90%, very rarely. You know, it's a tough, the international gig is a tough gig, and a very different gig. So he needs to get a library of experience under his belt before he takes it. He's done exactly the right thing by signing at La Rochelle.
Matt, just a last broad point on Leinster, and I should let people know Stuart Lancaster is going to be on OTB AM tomorrow morning, so that would be really interesting chat. So this power issue has raised its head again. So that asks a question, I suppose, of management. Is there a plan B that works against this type of approach? And then secondly, I've heard quite a few different pundits over the last 24 hours, and this, I suppose, more maybe mitigates management and their game plan a little bit more, mitigates in their favour, I mean. I've heard Bernard Jackman saying that he was in the RT podcast, and Gordon Darcy here in the Irish Times. Both of them were actually wondering about the level of depth at Leinster. Do we overrate it? Do we mistake success in the Pro 14 too much for success that will translate at European level? Like, for instance, Gordon Darcy was making the point, and Bernard Jackman was making a very similar one. He said in the Irish Times, Leinster over the years, Nathan Hines, Isan Asewa, Felipe Contepomi, Rocky Elson, Brad Thorne, all central to past success. He's talking here about, earlier in the piece, a local cohort of players sprinkled with some top international talent. He said they brought an X factor that wasn't readily available in the squad. And then later on he said typically that X factor was in the physical stakes. So he's talking about, you know, you want to neutralise a skeleton on Sunday, you bring in Hines or Thorne or these kind of guys. And Bernard Jackman, again, similar theme. He was just talking about the fact that the production line is so successful, and Leinster seem, be it budgetary or philosophical, I'm not sure why, but lately less keen to go out and sprinkle in some of that international talent that the other top sides in Europe seem to have. So it's about talent and talent depth, I guess, is to boil the question down, and then also game plan.
It's an interesting topic, Joe. I find the reaction of the Irish rugby media very, very much that, reactionary. After they beat Exeter, you know, they had them painted so high up the wall that they needed a ladder to get to them, you know. So you're never going to win Europe every year. That's why Leinster have only got 4. Your teams have got 4. You can't win it every year. They got beaten by a better side. Do they need some more power in that pack? Yes, they do. Now, we also have to say that you've got Scott Fardy, who has been a absolutely sensational worker for Leinster, coming to the end of his career. You've got Dev Toner coming to the end of his career. Roos Ruddock coming towards the end. They've got the power of your team comes from your second rowers. And James Ryan has been quiet, and they need some more power coming into that side, and they need some fresh blood for sure. You can see what a lack of power does when Maro Toge, who has been absolutely incredible for the last few years, has a quiet year, and what that does for England. You definitely need your locks to provide the power for the team, and that didn't happen on Saturday. Ruddock went off. You've got Kane Doris, who I suspected might have been a Lion before he got injured early in the year. He's not there. So, yes, they do. I don't think there's a panic stations. I think making the semi-finals of Europe is still a pretty good result, but they did get beaten on power, and it has happened a few times. On the other hand, if you spoke to the people at Exeter with a very good Exeter pack, they got outpowered, Leinster outpowered them. So there are days away from home, a long way in France, it is possible that you have a bad day. I would be very surprised if Leinster start throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but I would suspect that they do need to recruit. But mate, the Irish clubs have, compared to the French clubs, there's no sugar daddy pumping millions into Leinster like La Rochelle have. Their budget is, I believe, almost 3 times or 4 times bigger than Leinster. So, they have to live within their means, and COVID has meant the means for the Irish provinces is even less than it was before.
Yeah.
So there's some reality to be had there.
Yeah, no, for sure. And COVID has probably changed things. I suppose here we're talking about a sprinkling of talent, and you do wonder if Munster can go out and bring in Deolande and ROG Sneeman and these kind of players. Surely Leinster have the finances somewhere. Like, a lot of their players are centrally contracted as well.
Yeah, I would suspect you're right, Joe. Those 2 players you mentioned for Munster have not come in. Now, we know Snowden's had a very bad injury, but they haven't come in and set the world on fire either. So we have to be very careful here on how you go about it. Brad Thorne was a special player. Rocky Elsom that year was the best number 6 I've ever seen come out of Australia for 18 months. And he was not good. He was absolutely exceptional. This we did a long-term was a long-term asset for the club. So they chose their overseas players very carefully and very thoughtfully, and they have done that for a long time. They've been very good at it. So I suspect that with the end to Scott Vardy, Dev Toner's got a year, Maurice Ruddock comes at the end, I suspect you'll see some looking at the market and seeing who wants to come north. But right now, yeah, they got done on that game. Look, as a long-term watcher of Leinster, I wouldn't say I went away from that game and I'm just distraught and I'm worried. They got beaten by a better side in the day. They need a bit of tweaking, but that's still a very good team that didn't perform on that particular day.
Okay, fair enough. Before we get into lines, and I should prepare everyone, Chris Jones has picked his lines 36. I saw a grand total of 4 Irishmen make it. I mean, we're back to the bad old days of 1997 here. All-time low here, Chris. Ulster 24, Leicester 33 at Welford Road. Ulster were 16-7 up at half-time, Chris, and then, boom, 20 unanswered points. What was your sense of this game? Was there any great shift in what Leicester were doing, or did Ulster go into their shell somehow? What a strange second half, considering where they were.
Interesting, because I saw Jared Payne came out and said that Ulster sort of stopped playing. At half-time I thought Ulster were going to wipe the floor of Leicester. We saw what Ulster did to Harlequins a few weeks earlier. Danny Kerr on our podcast has played against Ulster a fair bit in recent years, and he thinks they're a quality side who were kind of overdue a trophy. And this seemed a perfect opportunity, didn't it, for Ulster to bag something. Look, Leicester have got something going on there they didn't have this time a year or 2 ago. They have more of metal. They have probably a slightly clearer game plan. They know what they're about more. They are a side who now can turn a deficit around against a good team like Ulster. But yeah, I think Ulster will see that as the one that got away, because you'd probably back them to beat a Montpellier side who looked absolutely chuffed to win at Bath. So I think if you're Ulster, you'd feel disappointed, because that was a prime opportunity for a trophy. And if they are behind the kind of Leinster and to a lesser extent Munster in the Champions Cup stakes, then this would have been a great chance to win something. Yeah,
it would have rubber stamped all the improvement under McFarland. Matt, we spoke on Saturday, the day after the game, and you said psychological. This was nothing more than a psychological collapse, really, on Ulster's part.
Yeah, they look. I think that to give Ulster a lot of credit and Coach McFarland a lot of credit, they've come enormous distance from the time Dan McFarland walked in the door there. They've done really well. John Beattie, as the CEO, has given them stability. He's given them direction. They seem to have an alignment between the management and the coaches and the players, which hasn't been there for a long time. Certainly wasn't there when I was there. Management were going in one direction and the team and the coaches were in the other. And then since then, the coaches got in trouble. Now they seem aligned. The guys are playing for the jersey again, which I think is really important up there. That jersey means a lot to the people. And when you had people in the team that they weren't playing for the jersey, they got off track. Now they're back on track and they've done well. The difference between losing a semi and winning a trophy is not much. And usually it's between the years. Now, if you look at exactly what Chris said, at half-time I thought, here we go. They've got to show at the final now. That's great for them. And they defended the lead instead of attacking it. Now, I know it's a cliche, but it's still the truth. They just stopped looking to be what they to be who they are and do what they do well. They run the ball very well. They attack with the kicking game very well, and they work really hard. And they stopped all of those things and just allowed Leicester to come back at them. I actually have a lot of confidence in this Ulster side. I think they'll come back very strong in the next few years. A good defeat in a semi can teach you a lot in a year or so. And I think they'll be very hurt, very disappointed. They'll be kicking themselves all summer. But I think that in the long run, they'll benefit from that. And that is, in a game like that, in a big game, you have to be mentally rock solid. And they weren't. They just lost it mentally there for a brief period. And again, I agree with Chris, since Geordie Murphy sadly left, and I'm a great admirer of Geordie Murphy, that Leicester side has changed. And they saw a weakness and they went for it. And that was the end of Ulster, unfortunately.
Yeah, OK. We'll take a short break. We're talking lines next with Chris Jones and Matt Williams. Back in 1 second.